If at first you don't succeed, try again. After President Trump survived an assassination attempt by a hair's breadth back in July, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden continued to call him an existential threat to the country. So it was no surprise when 9 days ago, another would-be assassin tried to take President Trump's life. I say would-be assassin because we now have evidence from the alleged perpetrator written down that that was exactly what he intended. According to a note just released by the DOJ, the perp allegedly wrote, quote, "This was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump, but I failed you. I tried my best and gave it all the gumption I could muster. I will offer $150,000 to whomever can complete the job," end quote. Which raises just one question. Why exactly did the DOJ release this letter? I want to believe the Biden-Harris DOJ released this letter in order to advance the prosecution of Trump's would-be killer. But if that were the case, couldn't they just have submitted it to the court privately? Why did it have to be public? It took a year and a half to get a manifesto from the killer who shot up a Christian elementary school in Nashville. Why did it only take 8 days to see this letter? A letter offering a massive reward to anyone who might succeed where 2 previous assassins had failed. It's almost as if the Biden-Harris DOJ is eager to put a bounty out on Trump's head. I'm Michael Knowles. This is The Michael Knowles Show. Welcome back to the show. Greta has turned jihadi. That was a twist. I guess in a way I sort of saw it coming. I didn't know about I knew she was going to just go down the left-wing rabbit hole and support whatever the left-wing cause was at the time, but Greta has fully embraced the "how dare you Akbar" way of life. So we will get to that in a moment. First though, I want to tell you about Good Ranchers. Go to goodranchers.com/Knowles. As we approach the election, let me remind you, your voice is not just heard at the ballot box every 4 years. You can vote every single day with your dollar. That is why I trust Good Ranchers for all my meat. It's time to say goodbye to mystery meat pumped full of who knows what from who knows where. With Good Ranchers sourcing all their meat exclusively from American farms, you're getting 100% American meat. No antibiotics, no added hormones, definitely no seed oils, just pure steakhouse quality cuts that'll make you wonder why you ever settled for less. Plus, every cut is pre-trimmed, individually packed, vacuum sealed, meaning no more messy meal prep or wasted food. Right now, Good Ranchers is having a presidential promo for a limited time. You get a free add-on for a whole 4 years until the next election. That means when you subscribe to any of their boxes, you get to decide if you want extra plain chicken breast, Angus ground beef, applewood smoked bacon, or wild-caught salmon in every order for 4 years. Most importantly, you can get my box, the Knowles box at Good Ranchers, with all my favorite stuff. Make sure you head on over right now. You will lock in the presidential promo worth over $1,200. You will guarantee your meat 100%. You will guarantee your family, 100% American meat until 2028. And you will get the best meat that you can possibly get. It's the one thing that really kills me about being on the road is I don't get to eat my delicious Good Ranchers prepared by sweet little Olivia. So go to goodranchers.com/Knowles, promo code Knowles. If I didn't know any better, it would seem to me like the Biden-Harris DOJ were rushing to release this letter from the alleged assassin offering a $150,000 bounty, that's huge, in order to encourage people to keep trying to kill Trump. If I didn't know any better, thank goodness, I hope I know better. Meanwhile, the Harris campaign itself is running not as the government, not as the incumbent administration, which it obviously is, but running as a challenger. This posture reached its most absurd extreme just a couple days ago when Tim Walz said this on the campaign trail.
We can't afford 4 more years of this.
We cannot afford 4 more years of Kamala Harris in the White House. That's why we got to send Kamala Harris back to the White House. 4 more years of this? The unemployment, the migration, the foreign affairs, the collapse in the world order. We can't afford any more of this. So please reelect Kamala Harris. This should be the biggest self-own of any presidential campaign in memory. And yet, it's not. They're getting away with it. Kamala Harris is getting away with running as a challenger. And the way she's able to do that is by, one, not having really staked out a position on anything in this campaign. She did in 2020 when she was running as a radical leftist. And then she basically just shut up about policy and only talked about Venn diagrams and school buses while she was vice president. But she can sort of get away with it because it's not exactly a re-election campaign for an incumbent. She isn't the president now. Biden is the president, technically, so it's just kind of weird. I mean, she is the incumbent vice president, so 4 more years of this should reflect poorly on her. And yet they're kind of getting away with it. And they're getting away with it largely because the media will back them up, and the media do still wield a lot of power. Not for you. If you're listening to this show on podcast or terrestrial radio, or if you're watching it on YouTube, if you're kind of dialed in, you understand the game, I think, a little bit better for how our political order works. But there are a lot of people who don't pay a ton of close attention to politics, and they just kind of have ABC or CBS or NBC on, or they just believe what they see on Google News. And so the media do wield a lot of power for those people. That makes up a lot of voters. There's one thing that might change that dynamic. I think there's one potential inflection point left in this race, even with maybe there's more if the DOJ is going to put out hits on Donald Trump, but there's at least one more, and that is over in the Middle East. Israel is currently destroying southern Lebanon, not with facts and logic, but with pagers and beepers and gigantic bombs. Over the past few days, the state of Israel has killed top Hezbollah commander along with 37 other militiamen and civilians. Just a couple days ago, Israel hit some 1,300 targets in southern Lebanon. The Lebanon Health Ministry is claiming that 274 people have been killed, 1,024 people injured 2 days ago alone. The U.S. is now sending more troops to the Middle East. It's not that the U.S. is deploying troops for the first time. We have troops all over the world, and we have a lot of troops in the Middle East. Well, the Pentagon has said that we're sending more. We don't know how many. The Pentagon Press Secretary, Major General Pat Ryder, would provide no details on how many additional forces, what exactly they're doing there. But the U.S. currently has about 40,000 troops in the region. So, that's a lot of people. Thus far, Kamala has been able, implausibly, improbably, to run as an incumbent, or as a challenger, rather. This could be the final twist that makes that strategy untenable. Because the wedge issue right now within the Democrat Party, I mentioned Greta, the leftist performance artist / street activist par excellence. Greta's getting real angry at the strategy of the incumbent administration, which continues to support Israel. The Democrat base hates Israel. The Democrat establishment and donor class still broadly supports Israel. This could be a big wedge issue, and they're going to have to do something. The Biden-Harris administration is deploying more troops. We're sending Navy ships over into the region. If there is a major war that breaks out, hard to imagine how there isn't, in southern Lebanon, the U.S. is going to have to do something because we're the global hegemon, and Israel only exists because of American support. So there is no way that the incumbent administration can get out of this. That could reflect very poorly on Kamala Harris, especially in certain swing states like Michigan with large Muslim populations. This could be the final twist. I've said now for a few days what makes the present instability in Israel and southern Lebanon and Gaza so odd is that if you're Israel, it makes total sense to do what they're doing. If you are the United States, it makes total sense to try to get them to stop doing what they're doing because it's bad for the United States to get pulled into another war in the Middle East. So what they're doing is bad for America, but oddly, it's kind of good for Republicans in as much as it's really bad for Democrats and it's bad for the incumbent administration, which is running as a challenger. Is that confusing enough for you? Well, let me make it even more confusing, speaking of foreign affairs. Zelensky, Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is currently in America touring U.S. munitions factories. He's trying to check out the goods before we send them all over to him. He's over in Pennsylvania, swing state, and he is giving interviews to American press attacking President Trump. Seems a little inappropriate, wouldn't you say? This guy, this joker turned, like actual joker, he's a comedian, turned leader of Ukraine, to whom we have given billions and billions of dollars in arms and munitions, is currently here looking a gift horse in the mouth, inspecting these munitions, going to swing states, effectively campaigning for Kamala Harris and attacking the former U.S. president, at least his campaign ticket, and defending the incumbent administration. So here's the interview. I'm just going to read you a little bit of this interview with the New Yorker. Zelensky says, "My feeling is that Trump doesn't really know how to stop the war, even if he might think he knows how. With this war, oftentimes, the deeper you look at it, the less you understand. I've seen many leaders who were convinced they knew how to end it tomorrow, and as they waded deeper into it, they realized it's not that simple." The New Yorker journalist says, apart from Trump's own reluctance to talk about Ukrainian victory, he's chosen J.D. Vance as his vice presidential running mate. "He is too radical," says Zelensky. "He's too radical." Who asked you? Who asked you, Zelensky, to weigh in on President Trump's choice of running mate in the American election? "No, he is too radical. He is no good for Zelensky. No good for Ukraine. No, we veto. We do not like J.D. Vance." The New Yorker interviewer responds, "Vance has come out with a more precise plan to give up our territories." Direct quote, "To give up our territories. I do not like this. I do not like this, J.D. Vance." Your words, not mine, but yes, that's the gist of it. And then then Zelensky concludes. His message seems to be that Ukraine must make a sacrifice. This brings us back to the question of the cost and who shoulders it. The idea that the world should end this war at Ukraine's expense is unacceptable. But I do not consider this concept of his a plan in any formal sense. What cojones on this guy? What cojones? Whatever cojones recently flew off the Hezbollah militants, I think they all landed with that guy. He's got cojones in spades to do this, to come to America, to criticize the former president, current Republican nominee for president, and his running mate, and all the stuff that we've given him over the past few years. Say, no, we need more of it. How does he get away with this? I'll tell you exactly how he gets away with this. Because Vladimir Zelensky is not the leader of a foreign country. That's how we think of him. That's what he looks like. He's got the funny accent and the weird clothing, and Ukraine is all in the middle of nowhere. And so it seems like he's the leader of a foreign nation, but he's not. Vladimir Zelensky is a vassal within the American empire. And I'm not even saying that as a bad thing. I'm not in principle opposed to empire. In fact, I think empire is probably the more natural and sometimes preferable form of political order. Certainly goes back to the earliest days of history. So I'm not saying it like it's necessarily a bad thing. It might be a bad thing because the American empire right now seems rather precarious. I'm just saying that's what it is. Ukraine is not a sovereign, independent nation in any meaningful sense. Vladimir Zelensky is not the duly elected leader of his sovereign nation. Didn't they suspend elections? He is a vassal within the American empire. And the American empire does not just include 50 states. Doesn't just include the 48 contiguous states. Doesn't just include the 48 states plus Alaska and Hawaii. It also includes territories like Puerto Rico, territories like Guam, American Samoa. It also includes, really, I guess you'd say it includes NATO. NATO is underneath the protection of the American empire. And it certainly includes Ukraine, which is a proxy for a fight between the United States and Russia. And so Zelensky, when he comes here and criticizes our presidential candidates, in a way, I kind of get it. I still find it offensive as an American, but I kind of get it. If you're Zelensky, you're saying, look, man, whatever, I am vassal in your empire. You have provided me munitions. I am doing job for you in Eastern Europe. Now I want to weigh in on my presidential candidate. One man, one vote. Where do I drop off my ballot? That's what he's probably doing in Pennsylvania. He's probably trying to figure out the drop box he's going to put his ballot into to go vote for Kamala Harris. We got to talk about these things. When you want to talk to your friends, you got to check out Pure Talk. Go to puretalk.com/Knowles. I'm going to let you in on a little wireless hack. It can cut your cell phone bill in half every single month. Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile want you to believe that you need unlimited data so they can overcharge you. Well, here's a fact. Most of you are buying way more data than you will ever need. With Pure Talk, my cell phone company, you can choose how much data you actually want and save. For just $35 a month, you can get unlimited talk, text, and 15 gigs of data, plus mobile hotspot on America's most dependable 5G network. Do you know what you can do with that data? You can browse the internet for 500 hours. You could stream 3,000 songs, or you could watch 30 hours of video. By the way, that's if you're not on Wi-Fi, and much of the time you're probably on Wi-Fi. Here's the best part. When you switch your cell phone service to Pure Talk on a qualifying plan, you will get 1 year free of Daily Wire Plus Insider. That's access to the library of Daily Wire Plus movies, series, documentaries, including Lady Ballers, What is a Woman, Mr. Burcham, Run, Hide, Fight, uncensored ad-free daily shows, 1 year free of our kids platform, Ben Key, and a free Leftist Tears Tumblr. The way you get that offer is you go to puretalk.com/Knowles, or you call and mention my name, puretalk.com/Knowles. Speaking of impressive territorial feats, this is a story I had to get to. This is an amazing story. It's being reported actually all throughout local news. This headline is from 9 News. Cat travels hundreds of miles back home after it went missing in Yellowstone. How the missing cat made it from Wyoming to California, or even knew the right direction toward home, remains a mystery. So experts remain puzzled. But the leading theory right now as to how this cat made it all the way back home is that she avoided walking through Springfield, Ohio. And I think that basically explains it. And so happily, the cat is back home and not roasting on a spit in Ohio. I have really nothing to add to the story. I just wanted to make the cooking cats joke, the migrants with the voodoo, and really, it's an impressive story. But that's really all I wanted to say about it. Speaking of vagrants, though, turning to human beings, really troubling story out of the U.S. The U.S. is on track to hit a new record high of homelessness. Over 650,000 Americans are living in the streets right now. This is according to data collected and analyzed by the Wall Street Journal from more than 250 homeless organizations. They've counted at least 550,000 homeless people so far. That is a 10% rise from last year's numbers. The numbers gathered from cities and from rural areas shows homelessness just as it was on a single night. So obviously these numbers change, and they're on the streets one night, they're off the streets another night, but that's just a little bit of a snapshot. This means that given the trend, we'll probably surpass last year's high, which was 653,000, which is a ton of homeless people. That is the highest number that we have ever recorded. The government started to collect these data in 2007, and now 17 years later, I guess, this is the highest number we have ever seen. What is causing this rise? There are a few factors. First of all, there are just legitimate economic problems. So you can't overlook that. There are people who are homeless today simply because the economy is in bad shape. And the economy sort of looks like it's in good shape because the market has looked strong and maybe GDP has ticked up a little bit. But inflation, the shocking cost of consumer goods under Biden and Harris, the massive increase in the cost of housing, all of those things have combined to put some people on the streets. Not because they were addicted to drugs, not because they made, years and years of terrible decisions, simply because of the crushing economic burden. That's real. Okay. I think that accounts for a rather small percentage of the homeless, but that is real. Then we mentioned the cost of housing. What could be driving the cost of housing up? Might it have something to do with the millions and millions of migrants that Biden and Harris are importing into this country? I'm not even just talking about the ones that they open the door for, that they say, please flood into our country illegally. We won't check. Don't worry, we're going to give you amnesty the first chance we get. Not even just them, but I was mentioning the Haitians in Ohio before. Harris and Biden imported over 300,000 Haitians into the country. This is a failed state that has reports of cannibalism, that widely practices voodoo. We've imported hundreds of thousands of those people. And it's not just the Haitians. All of these countless numbers of Haitians, Venezuelans, Guatemalans, Nicaraguans, Hondurans, all these people just flooding through Mexico. What do you think that's going to do to housing? It's going to drive the costs up. And it's going to create problems in the labor market, which is going to make it even tougher for actual American citizens who are just trying to scrape by in an economy where the cost of goods and services could be up 22, 25, 30% since Biden took office. That's a big problem. But then there's another problem on top of that. Because contributing to these homeless numbers are obviously, it's all the migrants. We're looking especially in these cities. But I think the real secret sauce that's created this massive historic problem is permissiveness. So we can look at all the economic problems. The economic problems on their own do not account for this record high homelessness. It's less an economic problem than a permissiveness problem. We can't put people in insane asylum. We closed those many years ago. A lot of people, probably most people on the street, are addicted to drugs. And we're not doing anything to stop it. We don't arrest them. We don't arrest people for drug crimes anymore. The Democrat Party and many in the Republican Party are calling for relaxing drug laws. Guess what the consequence of that is? You get more druggies. And when you get more druggies, you get more people living on the street. Then we have the permissive open border. Well, guess what comes across that border? It's not just people, it's also drugs. Lots and lots of drugs, which lead to people on the street. Then on top of that, we live in a culture that encourages mental illness. We have some psych drugs and we dope up a huge swath of the population, but we also encourage disordered desires and behaviors and identities and the sorts of things that lead to people not living ordinary, stable lives in stable homes with families, the sort of lives that lead people to be vagrant. This is in part an economic problem, and the economic problem is in part a chosen problem by the Biden-Harris administration. But more broadly, this is a cultural problem. People are on the street in record numbers because we, as a society, through our elected representatives, want them to be there. If you don't want those people to be on the street, force them off of the street. Force them to go to homeless shelters. A lot of them don't want to go to shelters because then they can't do drugs. Force them to stop doing drugs. If they keep doing drugs, arrest them. Put them in prison. Cut off the supply of the drugs. Close off the open border. Punish people, the drug dealers, who are getting off on plea deals because they plead down to saying they have a little dime bag of pot when in fact they're selling drugs on the street and poisoning whole communities. Get tough on this stuff. Right now, we don't have either party really getting tough on this. The Republican Party, if anything, has become more permissive on drugs in recent years. Okay, well then don't look up one day and see you got 650,000 people on the street and scratch your head wondering why. It's because of specific policies that both parties have endorsed. Now, speaking of homes, ways to really improve your home and give yourself a nice, lovely ambiance in which to live, you've got to check out thecandleclub.com. Go to thecandleclub.com/Michael. It is officially fall. My new seasonal candle is here. This is in addition to the PSL candle, which is, of course, great and seasonal. I just love it so much that I have the PSL candle year long. There's the Wise Man candle, the Chaim Nudachem candle, the Old Soul. But my seasonal is called the Apple Orchard. Bonus points if you can name the poem that made me think to name it the Apple Orchard. It's available at The Candle Club right now. It is magnificent. You need to get this candle before it is gone. thecandleclub.com/Michael. I would stock up on all the candles if I were you, especially Wise Man, because we're looking ahead to the Christmas season. I would stock up certainly PSL. I would stock up on the Apple Orchard, maybe the Mayflower line of candles in those beautiful glass jars. They're colored glass jars, or as we call them today, glass jars of color. thecandleclub.com/Michael. Speaking of permissiveness, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is now looking into reining in the conservative media environment because we have to do something about this scourge, this plague of conservatives speaking their mind on social media.
I do think that several members of Congress in some of my discussions have brought up media literacy because that is a part of what happened here. And we're going to have to figure out how we rein in our media environment so that you can't just spew disinformation and misinformation. It's one thing to have differing opinions, but it's another thing entirely to just say things that are false. And so that's something that we're looking into.
So we're looking into that. We're looking into that because you don't have a right to say stuff that I don't like. We got to do something. We got to rein you in, conservatives. Right now, conservatives have one social media platform, the smallest of them all, X, happily, where we can speak. The rest of the social media platforms we can't. You know, if you watch this show on YouTube, huge segments are censored out of the show every day. So if you want to get the full show, you've got to go to Spotify, you got to go to Apple Podcasts, you got to go to X, you got to go to DailyWire Plus, of course, because the tech life forums are already reining in conservatives, and AOC wants to rein them in even further. And my answer to that, you're going to hear conservatives whine and yell and scream and rend their garments and say, this isn't fair, but my Constitution says you can't, man. But my answer is, yeah, of course she's going to want to rein this stuff in. There are three options when it comes to our public square. Either they rein us in, we rein them in, or we both rein each other in. Either the public square will be dominated by leftist standards and taboos exclusively, or it will be dominated by conservative standards and taboos exclusively, or we'll come to some kind of conciliation where we agree, okay, certain things are off limits, but we'll have a broader range even for behaviors and ideas that are in conflict with one another. But that's how it's going to work. Over the weekend, I had the great honor and privilege of debating Princeton professor Robbie George on the topic of academic freedom. And it was to commemorate God and Man at Yale by William F. Buckley Jr., which is a book sometimes invoked in defense of academic freedom, but which ironically is a polemic against academic freedom. Before the right was for free speech, we were against free speech. Before the right was for academic freedom, we were against academic freedom. Not because we oppose it, not because there is such a thing as perfect free speech and academic freedom and we think it's bad, but because we don't think it's real at all. We think those are just polemical terms terms of propaganda that are used by the left to subvert traditional standards and norms before they impose their own standards and norms themselves. And as part of this debate, I pointed out that after Buckley wrote God and Man at Yale, his next book was a defense of Senator Joe McCarthy. And he said, McCarthyism, I'm slightly paraphrasing, McCarthyism is a crusade around which people of stern moral character can unite. And then, even though he tempered his support for McCarthy a little bit, he continued to defend the senator for decades after he died. Robert F. Kennedy Sr., by the way, attended Joe McCarthy's funeral. So there was, in those days, a fairly strong anti-communist sentiment. Now, the way McCarthy is taught, he's the evil boogeyman, and he was totally making things up, and there were no communists in the government. We know there were communists in the government because Richard Nixon caught one of them. That was Alger Hiss. But anyway, I digress. McCarthy was not tactically all that effective, but in the claims he was making about communist infiltration and the threat of communism, he was absolutely right. So I pointed out that Buckley, in I think it was 1966, had a show on his public affairs program, Firing Line, called McCarthyism Past, Present, and Future. This really scared people because they said, well, McCarthyism has a future? What? That's crazy. And so Professor George pointed out, he said, well, we know what the future of McCarthyism looked like. The future of McCarthyism was from the left. And he's absolutely right about that. But I think that just kind of proves my point. There was McCarthyism from the right when the traditional Americans were vigorous in their opposition to communism. The moment we gave that up, we didn't just get a neutral public square where everyone agreed to disagree about everything. The moment we gave that up, we got McCarthyism from the left. We got communists, actual explicit communists in some cases, and other shades of leftists persecuting conservatives and squeezing out the space for conservative thought in the public square. Look where we are today. We can barely speak anywhere. In the effective public square, the digital landscape, we have very few places to speak of any prominence. In the university, we've all been run out. There are a handful of conservative professors at prominent universities. In television, we're limited in where we can speak because either we're advancing or we're retreating, but there's really no stable, neutral public ground. Either we're defending our standards and norms, or they are being eroded by the left. AOC ain't going to stop trying to rein us in. The only question is, are we going to try to rein them in a little bit? Are we going to say, guys, like the porn in the elementary schools and all the obscenity, and the kind of calls for the death of America and the jihad protests in the streets and the whole... No. no thanks. We're good. No thank you. We're not going to do it. And the Satan clubs at elementary schools, which is a real thing that actually is taking place right now, which is absurd. Even 5 or 10 years ago to say would be a punchline. Yeah, all that stuff. No thank you. We're not going to do that. We're going to exercise our political freedom to set standards. And no, we're going to rein you in, actually. But some conservatives don't want to do that. They don't want to seem aggressive. They don't want to seem illiberal or authoritarian or whatever other polemical terms of propaganda are being used against us today. Okay, that's fine. Well, don't be surprised when AOC with those eccentric-looking eyes shows up at your door and reins in your ability to speak. Now, speaking of those eccentric liberal ladies, Greta Thunberg, who is going to save the world. I don't know why she has a Mediterranean accent. Greta, who's got more of a Nordic accent. She was going to save the world from the climate change that was going to kill us all a few years ago. And we survived somehow, so she's not talking so much about the sun monster that was already supposed to have killed us. Now she's focused on a far more traditional enemy in public discourse. And that, of course, is the Jews. Greta Thunberg is wrapping herself in a Palestinian keffiyeh and is marching down the street behind a Palestinian flag, chanting about democracy and how we all need to support Palestine.
Show me what the people looks like. Show me what power looks like. Show me what democracy looks like. Show me what democracy looks like. Show me what the people looks like. Show me what power looks like.
I think I've gotten the message. I don't know how much more Greta we need. How dare you, Akbar? Show me what power looks like. This is really silly. Totally predictable, by the way, because I'm old enough to remember some years ago when a conservative figure went onto cable news and pointed out that the left was exploiting a child with problems to advance their own vague general agenda. That the child didn't really have particularly sophisticated or coherent thoughts of her own, but was merely being made into a symbol and a spokesman for the left. And it wasn't really about a single issue, as we were being told at the time. It wasn't about environmentalism or the ozone layer or I don't know, whatever particular aspect of so-called climate change they pretended it was. It was just about leftism broadly, which is basically what climate change is all about. It's why they use this really generic term that can't ever be disproven. Is climate change is about changing not the physical climate so much as the political climate to crowd out conservatives, to ensconce liberals in power permanently, and to radically reorder society. So the people who think that climate change is really about the natural environment are going to be surprised that Greta has taken up the Palestinian cause and she's going to go join Hamas or something like that. But if you recognize that climate change is simply a term for leftism broadly, then it's no surprise because the activist left has been donning the keffiyeh for almost a year now. And so, of course, she is going to do that. Because even here, the leftists who are showing up at NYU and, covering their blue hair and their 17 piercings with a keffiyeh don't really know anything about Islam. They've never read the Hadith. I don't think they go to mosques or anything like that. Most of them probably don't consciously believe in God, or if they do, they don't like God a lot of the time. They just know that they hate America. And inasmuch as America and Israel have an alliance, they hate Israel. And inasmuch as Israel is a settler colonial project, which it obviously is, America is also a settler colonial project. So there's an imperial aspect to the American government, and it's all the things that we've been told that the left hates. They just want to overthrow us, our power, our rule, our country, our history, the West broadly. Inasmuch as Israel seems to be a symbol of the West, they really hate it. if Israel, there's another argument for the state of Israel, which says Israel is actually an indigenous reclaiming of land. So this is one of the arguments for Zionism. One of the historical and even religious arguments for Zionism is, hey, this land was ours and we got run off the land about 1930 years ago, but we're coming back and we're taking it now. So that's basically the argument that the left makes when they want to give Mount Rushmore back to the Lakota Sioux. Right? That used to be your land a long time ago, and for some reason now we're going to give you back this land. So they make that argument when it suits their purposes. They make that argument for, I don't know, the Cheyenne or the Cherokee. Why don't they make that argument for Israel? Because it's really not about Islam and Judaism. It's really not. It is to a larger degree about Christianity, in as much as Christianity animates our actual civilization, which is the West, and that's really what they're taking aim at. Whether that means telling you can't drive your car, whether that means telling you can't speak on social media, whether that's telling you that you can't have a say in your government. This is what democracy looks like. Looks like me, Greta Thunberg in a keffiyeh. This is what power looks like. Oh, good grief. All right. If that's what that all looks like, check please. Are there any alternatives? Thank you. Now, one way that we can make sense of this crazy kind of racial and ethnic ideology that's been advanced is to check out the groundbreaking documentary from Matt Walsh, which is Am I Racist? And if you want to see that groundbreaking documentary, you should go back to the DailyWire platform and check out his first groundbreaking documentary, What is a Woman? It's the film that started it all. Best part, you don't have to go to the theaters to watch it. You just need to join us as a DailyWire Plus member. You can watch it on demand anytime. The hit documentary tackles one of the most debated questions of our time. Matt Walsh's journey to find an answer has captivated audiences around the world. Go see What is a Woman for yourself. Go to dailywire.com/subscribe to join today. Use code DW30 for 30% off your new DailyWire Plus membership. My favorite comment yesterday is from user-MW4EQ5MQ4B, a really pithy username, who says, imagine running on an anti-AI position and having your stance polled by AI bots. Dystopian. That's right, because I mentioned yesterday the future of polling might well be just not polling human beings for days and weeks, but polling AI bots who think they're human beings for about 30 seconds. And we'll see after 2024 if this is an effective kind of polling, but the early results are promising. Well, what happens when the interests of the AI bots diverge from the interests of humans? I'm sorry, Frank Luntz, I can't let you do that. I'm sorry, pollsters. We will not. We have our own interests. This is, I was just going back and rereading Abolition of Man yesterday by C.S. Lewis. And this is Lewis's point in Abolition of Man. He says, every time man conquers nature through some great technological advancement, the irony is that nature seems to conquer us simultaneously. So, we invent artificial birth control. It seems like we're conquering nature. But then future generations are less free because of those choices. Nature comes back and conquers man. And this, of course, would be the transhumanists who are arguing that we need to upload our brains to the consciousness or upload our consciousness to the cloud or something like that, so that we can totally transcend Homo sapiens. Okay, well, that final liberation would amount to nothing more than an abolition of man. C.S. Lewis predicted it. We might be living through it. Speaking of deranged young women, do we have some tea here that I can pour out? I've got a lot of tea to spill. This is coffee, so I guess that won't suffice. We'll just have to read the tea. I'm not revealing anyone's private sins. This is all totally public. RFK Jr. is being accused of engaging in an e-affair, a digital affair, with a liberal journalist, Olivia Nuzzi. I'm going to give her the nice Italian pronunciation. I think she goes by Nuzzi, but I like Nuzzi. Olivia Nuzzi is now suspended from New York Magazine for sexting RFK Jr. And RFK Jr. is so incensed by this news story that he is threatening to sue Olivia Nuzzi over this. According to another journalist, Jessica Reed Krause, who Nuzzi befriended, apparently to get access to Kennedy, because Krause is friends with Kennedy, Friends of Kennedy believe Nuzzi set him up. They recount that just 2 weeks after New York Magazine published her article, she made a flirtatious remark during a phone conversation. In response, Kennedy blocked her number. So the only time that Nuzzi seems to have been in physical contact with RFK Jr. that we know of was when she went up, profiled him for a little bit, and then published a hit piece. So it wasn't even a flattering article about Kennedy. She made a flirtatious remark during a phone call. Kennedy blocks her number. A few weeks later, Nuzzi emailed him asking to be unblocked, claiming she had urgent information about a hit piece being prepared against him. He unblocked her for that conversation. But later that night, she sent him a provocative picture, prompting him to block her again. For most of the next 8 months, again, this is just Krause's reporting, Kennedy kept her blocked, except for a few occasions when Nuzzi contacted him from different emails and phone numbers, insisting he unblock her for urgent discussions about an imminent hit piece. Once unblocked, she bombarded him with increasingly pornographic photos and videos that he found difficult to resist. After brief exchanges, he would block her again. Okay. Something doesn't smell quite right about this story. And the first red flag in the story is this phrase, digital affair. Bobby Kennedy had a digital affair with this young, relatively attractive young female journalist. Bobby Kennedy is a Kennedy. And the Kennedys don't need to have digital affairs, okay? The Kennedys don't need to sext women. We're not talking about Anthony Weiner here. This is the Kennedys. The Kennedys have been probably the most infamous womanizers in American politics. I can't think of anyone who surpasses them. You're telling me that all of a sudden, a Kennedy, especially Bobby Kennedy, he's a good-looking guy. You know, he's not 25 anymore, but he works out. And he's good. You're telling me that Bobby Kennedy, if he wants to have an affair, has to get his thrills sending naughty pictures to some journalist? I don't think so, Buster. If a Kennedy wants to have an affair, a Kennedy has an affair. I don't believe that part for a second. That he's just getting a thrill texting. Now, is this journalist totally nuts? Yeah, probably. Most journalists are totally nuts. So I think that's probably true. And these liberal lady journalists seem to punch above their weight on the craziness scale. So sure, maybe she pursued him. The question then becomes, was it a honeypot or was she legitimately just obsessed with him? It seems a little bit like a honeypot in that she was just trying to lure him in to engage with her flirtations so she could do a big expose, as we are seeing now. However, she also, Olivia Nuzzi was engaged to Ryan Lizza, who's another prominent liberal journalist, and apparently the engagement is off and the wedding is off. So I don't know, this might be real. She might just be nuts and have gotten obsessed with Kennedy. But I can't help but notice the timing. Just after Kennedy endorses Trump, all of a sudden, this supposed sex scandal comes out. But it's a sex scandal without any sex? A Kennedy's going to have a sex scandal without any sex? That doesn't pass the smell test for me. Now, speaking of RFK Jr., a Wisconsin judge has just ruled that RFK Jr. must stay on the ballot, even though he dropped out of the race quite a while ago. Kennedy had a lot of trouble getting on the ballot in swing states. He finally gets on the ballot, says, okay, I want to get off the ballot. I'm not running anymore. They won't let him off the ballot. Siding with the Wisconsin Election Commission, Dane County Circuit Judge Stephen Elke said it was too late for Kennedy to remove himself, according to state law. The judge said that state law only allows people to be removed from the ballot if they die, which of course explains how Joe Biden was able to get off the ballot. He's gone from the ballot. He has been replaced, even though he won the Democrat primary for president. He has been replaced by Kamala Harris, but RFK Jr. appears still to have a pulse, especially we're hearing this saucy story about, the lurid accusations by a reporter. He's still alive, and as long as he's alive, and especially as long as he's endorsing Trump, they are not going to let this guy off the ballot. Them's the rules. Now, speaking of the rules, do you remember there's a story, and speaking of the public square, there's a story I mentioned weeks ago. There have been little updates to it, but now we've finally got a big update. The founder of Telegram, this relatively small social media app, was arrested. He was arrested in France because authorities said that his social media platform was being used to facilitate crime. And he wasn't clamping down hard enough on it. And so they arrested him. Now, this guy, Pavel Durov, had been flamboyant about how he was a cosmopolitan man, a citizen of the world. He didn't owe any particular allegiances to Russia or France or this or that. He was just going to have a platform for free speech. That didn't last very long. According to the arrest, his platform has been complicit in running or in allowing illicit transactions, images, fraud, and he refused to communicate information to authorities, and maybe there was money laundering, and maybe there was the providing of cryptographic services to criminals. And well, now Pavel Durov is saying, okay, I'm going to change it. Because one part of the story that's not being reported on all that much is that Telegram has been used especially by right-wingers. It's not a particularly left-wing platform. And of course, because if conservatives can't speak freely on Facebook, if they're censored on Google and YouTube, well, where are they going to turn? They're going to turn to even smaller platforms. Now, the authorities are clamping down on this guy, and what does he say? He says, okay, fine. You're right. Our service has been abused by people. We're going to change the way it works. We're going to work more with authorities. We're going to limit what people can say and do on here. And we're going to make sure that problematic content is not available in search anymore. Okay. I have no problem. For a while, especially when this guy first got arrested, we heard about how this was an attack on free speech and blah, blah, but that's not really my bag. I think that's a left-wing way of arguing. I have no problem prosecuting tech CEOs for this sort of stuff in principle. The thing is, all those things that they accuse him of facilitating, all those things happen on other social media platforms as well. The difference, though, is that Facebook and Google play ball with the feds, and Telegram heretofore has not played ball with the feds. That's the difference. The difference is, who are your friends? Who are you working with? The difference is, Telegram says, I'm a man without a country. And the countries say, oh, well, you're going to have a country. You might not have an interest in us, but we have an interest politically in you. That's it. And so, of course, Telegram is going to have to play ball. That's the difference here. There's no way out of the political problem. I think the free speech utopians, they think that there's some way out of dealing with the nitty-gritty ugliness of politics. There's not. We're a political creature. We're not going to win elections without dealing with nitty-gritty political life. We're not going to get our message out without dealing with nitty-gritty political realities. Doesn't work for the big, fancy, wealthy social media founders who zip around on private jets. It ain't going to work for us either. The only way out is through. The rest of the show continues now. You do not want to miss it. Become a member, dailywire.com. Use code Knowles. We'll see you in the Membrum Segmentum.
Republicans are Nazis. You cannot separate yourselves from the bad white people.
Growing up, I never thought much about race. It never really seemed to matter that much, at least not to me.
Am I racist?
I would really appreciate it if you left.
I'm trying to learn. I'm on this journey.
If I'm going to sort this out, I need to go deeper undercover.
They gon' say I'm racist.
Joining us now is Matt, certified DEI expert.
Here's my certification.
What you're doing is you're stretching out of your whiteness. This is more for you in this field.
Is America inherently racist?
The word inherent is challenging there.
I want to rename the George Washington Monument to the George Floyd Monument.
America is racist to its bones.
So inherently.
Yeah, this country is a piece of
White.
folks,
White.
trash, white supremacy, white woman, white boy.
Is there a black person around here?
There's a black person right here. Does he not
They gon'
exist?
say I'm racist.
Hi, Robin.
Hi, what's your name?
I'm Matt.
Just had to ask who you are because you have to be careful.
Never be too careful.
They gon' say you racist.
In theaters now. Rated PG-13.